part of it is also, it's hard because you want your parents to accept you right away, but sometimes they need a little time. And so with my parents, I've been really open to that journey with them, and the more space I've given them, the more that they have come closer to me. And so I think that's the other thing to remind people. Sometimes they might not be immediately accepting, and they might not have all the right words or the right forms of support, but in time, I think that they might get there, hopefully. I really hope in 2022 that we could actually be in the same room together. But for now, hopefully this is good. I hope you're all cozy. Because I believe in the power of art, I will be weaving in my art and stories throughout my talk today. And I'm just going to share my... I'd like to begin with a photo series I created called Trisha that is dedicated to my mom. My story has always been bound to your prayer to have 2 boys. Maybe it was because of the way you felt weighed down as a young girl, or the ways you felt you weighed down your mother by being a girl. Maybe it was all of the above, and also just being a girl in a world that is intent on crushing women. So you prayed to a God you can't remember for 2 sons, and you got me. I was your first, and I was soft. Did this ever disappoint you? You had also prayed for me to look like Dad, but you forgot to pray for the rest of me. It is strange that you would overlook this, as you have always said, be careful what you pray for. When I take off my clothes and look in the mirror, I see Dad's body as you wished, but the rest of me has always wished to be you. I modeled myself, my gestures, my futures, how I love and rage all after you. Did this worry you and Dad? Did you have the kinds of conversations in bed that parents of genderqueer children on TV have, where the dad scolds the mom? This is your fault. No one is to blame. Not you, not the God you prayed to. I was right to worship you. You worked full-time, went to school part-time, managed a home, raised 2 children who complained about frozen food and made fun of your accent, and cared for your family in India. Most days in my adult life, I can barely care for myself. I remember finding these photos of you 3 years ago and being astonished, even hurt by your joyfulness, your playfulness. I wish I had known this side from you before Canada, marriage, and motherhood stripped it from you and us. I learned to pray too. My earliest prayers were to be released from my body, believing that this desire was devotion. This was about wanting to be closer to God. I don't believe in God anymore, but sometimes I still have the same prayer. Then I remind myself that the discomfort I feel is less about my body and more about what it means to be feminine in a world that is intent on crushing femininity in any form. Maybe I got my wish to be you after all. You used to say if you had a girl, you would name her Trisha. As I mentioned, this is a photo essay that I created to honor my mother, the person whose love helped me survive as a teenager, despite my relentless experiences of oppression. This project also allowed me to honor the daughter that my mother wasn't allowed to have. One of the things I have found really interesting as I think about my story and the fact that my mom prayed to have boys because of her experiences in India and Canada being a girl, that like my birth essentially was tied to misogyny. And there's something really devastating, especially thinking about a brown woman not wanting to have girls because of her own experience. But despite the fact that my birth, like I said, was tied to misogyny, I was a very femme and gender creative kid. Okay, and then I'm going to share another story for you about that sort of talks about my experience being a gender creative kid in Alberta, where I grew up. Junior high has marked the sudden death of sweatpants. They've been replaced by name brand denim and name calling, which will continue every day for the next 6 years. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed Will Jensen walks close behind me on my way to class. He's on his tippy toes as though he's wearing high heels, fluttering his hands and talking with a lisp to his audience of jocks. Is that what I look like? They laugh and I pretend I'm oblivious. They have to laugh because Will is the most popular boy in school. Maybe if I laugh too, Will and I could be friends. He kicks me and I say sorry. He is puzzled. He kicks me again, this time timidly, like a child unsure of his own strength. And I apologize again. His friends find this funny, so he keeps kicking, they keep laughing, and I keep apologizing. I'm bound to sorry as though it's my only defense, as though each sorry holds a tiny spark of dignity. The same jocks surround me by my locker later and warn me of impending dangers. Are you sure no one's beaten you up yet? You're definitely going to get beaten up in high school. Definitely. One of the brown jocks, the one who laughs the loudest, follows me into the washroom. He stands wide at the stall right next to me, making his presence known. I pee as fast as I can, thinking about how our matching skin doesn't protect me and how that feels like a betrayal. I look for safety with the girls. We have more in common, like our love for Jodeci and General Hospital. I'm safe for them too. I'm the boy that they can talk to about their crushes on the other boys. Maybe I'm too safe. Mia Zinner, one of my few friends, likes to tell me how much she wishes I was dead. You know, it's only 9:30 a.m., but I just want to kill you, Gaylord. When I ask my parents if I can change schools, my dad tells me that my hairstyle is the real problem. You know, in India, boys who part their hair like yours in the middle are, you know. So I learn which hallways to avoid, sissy, and which faces to avoid. If you ever look at me again, I will pound the shit out of you, fucking fag. How to walk a little firmer, talk a little deeper, be a little smaller. But I can't make it stop. I catch an episode of The Wonder Years when Kevin is getting picked on by a bully. Loser, loser, loser. Fed up one day, Kevin responds, fine, I am a loser. The bully responds, you are? In shock. He never picks on Kevin again. I immediately take note and am determined to test this out the next day. Gaylord. Fine, I am a Gaylord. You are? Bingo, just as predicted. Yes, yes, I am. Do you even know what that means? Sure I do. It means loser? No, it means you like boys. So this story that I just shared is from my book, God Loves Hair. And it describes the kind of experience I had in junior high and high school, like I said, here in Edmonton. Well, I'm not in Edmonton right now, but in Edmonton. The story also, for me, I think what it highlights is that for so many queer and trans people, our sexualities and our genders are conflated at a very, very young age. You know, I was called Gaylord all the time, or fag, or gay, but my classmates actually had no idea what my sexuality was. What they saw is that I was acting like a girl, and then somehow that brought my sexuality into question. So, you know, calling me Gaylord or fag actually had nothing to do with my sexuality. It was about being too girly. And in North America, especially, there's nothing worse than for quote unquote a boy to act like a girl. And so from a very young age, my gender has been policed. And this has been really confusing and painful. I think one of the hardest things about growing up, especially as a teenager, is I learned very quickly that for me to survive, I had to surrender my femininity. And what that meant was, you know, taking up more space and going to the gym all the time and, you know, downing the chicken breast and trying to make myself as large as possible so that people didn't see me as feminine. And so I essentially tried to destroy that part of me. But, you know, because of my experiences, honoring femininity has become a central theme and intention in my work. So you'll notice Trisha, the first photo series that I just shared, was very much honoring my mom. The second story, you know, was sort of like highlighting the way that gender and sexuality conflated. And another project that I made to honor femininity, particularly brown femininity, is a children's picture book that I wrote called The Boy in the Bindi. And I'd love to read that for you now. Have you seen my ummy's dot? It's a bright and pretty spot. Her dot comes in every hue. She likes red and sometimes blue. She peels it and pastes it like a sticker, gently with her thumb and finger. Above her nose is where it goes. What is this dot? I want to know. Ummi, why do you wear that dot? What's so special about that spot? It's not a dot, says my ummi. It's not a spot. It's a bindi. What's a bindi? What does it do? My bindi keeps me safe and true. Well, how does it do that, ummi? How? Well, when I stick it on my brow, my bindi tells me where I'm from. My bindi reminds me of my mom. And when she gave me my first one, I look at her bindi with this view. I too would like to feel safe and true. Ummi, can I have a bindi to wear? Do you have one more to spare? She smiles and reaches in her drawer. Ta-da, she says, this one is yours. She sticks it on my bare forehead, but in the mirror, I don't see red. What a surprise to discover. Yellow is my bindi's color. As soon as it's on, I feel so calm, like all the noise around is gone. But when I'm outside, people stare. Maybe they want a bindi to wear? I do not have the words to say. But if I close my eyes and wait, my bindi turns into a star, and then my forehead turns into the sky. That's when all my fears fade out of sight, and my body feels so light. Ummi was so very right. So now I leave it on my face. My bindi will always have its place. When I bathe or go to bed, my bindi stays on my forehead. Not just because of the glue, or because it keeps me true, but sometimes I felt small like a dot, and sometimes ugly like a blot. But if a bindi can be more than a spot and bring beauty where there was not, maybe I can too. Have you seen my yellow dot? It's a bindi, not a spot. Why do you wear a bindi, you say? Why is it so special anyway? Well, my bindi is like a third eye, watching over me all the time, making sure I don't hide everything I am inside and everything I want to be. Thank you, Ummi, for my bindi. So just now, for those of you just signing in, I was just sharing a children's picture book that I wrote called The Boy and the Bindi. And again, the reason why I wrote it is because of my experiences, it feels so important to make work that celebrates femininity, especially like POC femininity. Looking back on my own grade school experiences, when I was a young boy, I will never forget my school counselor, Miss Mackinnon. And I'd love to tell you a little bit about Miss Mackinnon. And I used to see her regularly. And you have to understand that this was a time where language like homophobia didn't even exist. People didn't use that word. Everything was just sort of like about getting picked on. We didn't have GSAs. So, like gay straight alliances and that sort of thing. It's so bizarre and wild and exciting now to go to schools and see like rainbow flags everywhere. Those weren't things that I grew up with. And excuse me. But I used to see my school counselor because I used to get picked on a lot. And, like the story I shared. And one of the things that she did for me that I'll never forget is, I'd say, Miss Mac, people keep saying like, I'm gay. They keep calling me Gaylord. And she, for some reason, had this like Texas accent. I don't know why. I mean, I know I live in Alberta, but it was very strange. So I'm going to try and do a very bad Texas accent for you. She would say to me, well, the next time one of those boys asks you that, you just look at them in the eye and you say, why? Are you interested? And, for me, jokes aside, one of the things that was so important about that moment is that she took something that was a negative, something I was being made fun of for, and she actually kind of turned it into a positive, right? She sort of implied that the reason why these boys were harassing me is because they were interested in me. Of course, I never ever used that line. I never said to someone, are you interested? But it really normalized how I was, it really normalized who I was, which I'm so grateful for. And the other thing that she did that I'll never forget is that in the class after that, anytime she would see someone picking on me, or calling me fag or whatever, she would go up to them and just sit on their desk with her arms crossed, until they stopped, which they would. So, you know, for me, throughout my journey, it's been largely women and feminine people like Miss Mac, my mother, and countless other women who have nurtured and protected me and helped me to grow into the girl I am now. That said, I think that, you know, we need to be vigilant about the ways in which that expectations of femininity actually turn us against each other. You know, one of the things that I have found hardest about coming out as trans, you know, like when I experience transphobic violence from men, it's hard, but in some ways it doesn't surprise me. But I think one of the hardest experiences I've had since coming out as trans has actually been cruelty from other women. And again, I don't think this is because women are cruel people or anything like that, but I think that in the face of sexism and misogyny that women and feminine people experience, sometimes the way that we deal with that is we take it out on each other. One of my favorite trans historians and writers, by the name of Morgan Page, has this rule for trans people on Twitter where she says, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, you know, her whole idea is that if we have issues with each other, we need to talk to each other directly as opposed to tweeting about it or calling each other out. And I think this is a really lovely sentiment to think about broadly, not just trans people, but I think in any marginalized community, in any community, certainly with other women and femmes, like I'm always saying, we have to find ways to communicate with each other directly when we're hurting, as opposed to being cruel to each other or hurting each other. So I'd love to give you that to think about here tonight as we think about Trans Day of Remembrance. I'd like to try to close with a song I wrote called Girl, It's Your Time. I wrote it and released it when I first came out as trans in 2016. And I wrote it because I wanted to give myself, not only I wanted to give myself something to mark this new chapter in my life, but I also wanted to give it, I wanted to give myself something to sing on the days that I don't feel strong. You know, I think transness is a gift. I'm so proud to be trans in the world, but there are hard days, and sometimes singing this song to myself makes me feel a little bit more confident. So I we'll see if this works here. Hopefully, I'm sure it will. I'm not too worried, but if it doesn't, maybe we'll do an a cappella version for all of you. I would love to dedicate this song to all the women and feminine people here today. And I'd especially love to dedicate this song to anyone in the room who identifies as trans, gender nonconforming, trans feminine, non-binary. Much love to you. And again, I wish we could be in the same room today. But after this song, I'm happy to take your questions. If I could tunnel back through time, aggression, dead skin cells, I would guard all of my softness, my tender places, like my life depended on it, so that when I grew up, I wouldn't feel I had lost everything. Girl, it's your time. Don't ever ever change your mind, 'cause you're mine. All those years of playing tough, all those years I gave you up, I'm never gonna hide you, never gonna fight you again, not for any man. Girl, it's your body. Don't ever say you're sorry, 'cause you're not a copy. All those years I wore myself hard, all those years I kept you barred, I'm never gonna hide you, never gonna hide you again. but it's not your world. It's not your world. You're not always safe, so whenever you're afraid, just know you're okay. My girl, it's yours, yours, yours. This time is yours, yours, yours. This time is yours, yours, yours. This time is yours, yours, yours. I'm never gonna hurt you, never gonna hurt you again. I've already met you. Thank you so much. And I'm going to just stop sharing the screen. 27 new messages. Let's do this. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Thanks so much for these kind words. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I know that asking the first question is always the hardest thing. So yeah, who wants to be the brave one? Oh yeah, it's your Spotify. That's so nice.
Hello.
Hi.
Vivek, am I pronouncing it right?
Yep.
Hi. I am a child and youth work at Sheridan, and I'm in my third year. I know throughout my future career, I'm going to be encountering many youth and children who will be in the process of finding out more about themselves, who they truly are. So I wanted to be a support for them. I wanted to know from your experience growing up and such. I was hearing your stories. What could have been a support for you? What could have helped you kind of smooth things a bit? How can I say? What kind of support, like what kind of words would you like to hear at the moment? What kind of people would you like to encounter on your difficult times?
Yeah,
That-
I mean, again, I think two of the greatest examples are my mom and Miss Mackinnon, who, they didn't necessarily have all the right language. My mom coming from a different culture, she doesn't use words like transgender and whatnot, but like she
Mhm.
finds her way to show me support. And I think there's so many ways to show support. I think for starters, if you have an office, I do think that I'm a little immune to like the rainbow flag, but I do think it's a sign that queer people look for, and
Mhm.
just seeing it can actually make a difference.
Right.
I think, making sure you're not making assumptions about people's gender, checking in about pronouns. I think those things are really important. I think educating yourself, on whatever issues you like on LGBTQ, 2Ls LGBTQ issues, reading articles, because the thing is even language in our community is just changing all the time. So
Right.
you might think you took one course or workshop on how to be an ally, but the language and the discourse is always changing. So keeping yourself informed. I think also always going back to the pronoun thing, I think always sharing your pronouns first as an example, as opposed to putting someone on the spot and being like, hey, what are your pronouns? To be like, hey,
Right.
my name is such and such. These are the pronouns that I use. And also just, never underestimate what it means to actually let the people you're working with know that you want to be someone they can reach out to. So, in my classroom, for instance, they're a little bit older, but I'll always say, if there's something about this classroom experience that makes you feel uncomfortable, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I really want to create a space where you feel like you can learn. I think that those things, they all sound so basic, but I think that they can make a huge difference. And I think the other thing is making sure that if you see harassment, you'd be surprised how often, I think when I look back at my childhood, the people I'm really upset about actually are the adults. I'm like, I got
Right.
harassed all the time. Where were the adults? How come they didn't intervene? And I think that that's such an important thing. Like if you are an adult and you're in a position of power, if you see a child or if you see a teenager, or if you see anyone in a public space being harassed, find a way to disrupt that harassment. And even if, the thing I hear often is like, oh, but I'm scared that they might come attack me or whatever. But sometimes you don't have to go up to them and be like, hey, stop that. Even what Miss McKinnon did, just crossing her arms and standing there, it just immediately stopped it. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think of on the top of my head, if that's useful to you.
No, absolutely. I was taking a bunch of notes. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
great.
Thank you.
And for those of you, like, don't feel like, I mean, if you want to turn your camera on, it's always nice to see you. But if you want to just drop questions in the chat, that's always great as well. So whatever you feel most comfortable with. And thanks for that question.
I have a couple questions for you.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Well, I'm actually a student at the University of Calgary too. I don't know if you know Professor Joe Caddy.
I don't actually.
He teaches gender studies. Anyways, for one of his classes, we have to attend 2 community events. So this is one of my events.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
then write a report on it. So my first question is, how do you find that being vulnerable in your work impacts you in your writing? And what is the hope that you have for your readers by including like all those personal experiences and events?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Sometimes being vulnerable in my work does take a toll. I wrote a book called I'm Afraid of Men, and I sort of recounted my experiences of harassment and violence for men. And writing that book, I had nightmares every night. I dreamt of being beaten up all the time. So sometimes it does take a toll. But sometimes it's also really healing, to be honest. Like as I was doing this performance, and reading that story, Gaylord, and thinking of myself and looking at that photo of me as a child, there's a part of me that feels like, wow, like, look at how far you came. You were this sweet kid and you had a really crappy experience, but now you're an adult and you get to talk about your experiences and hopefully try to make the world a little bit better for other people. So, in some ways that's really, really healing. So I don't know, does that answer your question? I know you asked a 2-parter there and I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. Thank you. And I just have one more small question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer, but I was just wondering if you did any projects, like either probably not as much during high school, but during your university career on campus that allowed you to have your voice heard or like created a community for other people.
Not when I was a student. So unfortunately, when I was a student, because of the kind of harassment I faced on a regular basis, I was very much like an in and out student, like go in, do your time, do your homework and get out. But I did do a project about 10 years ago called What I Love About Being Queer, which is like a big community project that I did because I found that the narrative of queerness is sometimes so associated with like bullying and harassment and tragedy. And I wanted to show people that actually there's so many wonderful things about being queer. And so I asked several people on film to answer what they love about being queer. And then it became a Tumblr site. So I don't know if you're all still on Tumblr, but there's a Tumblr site called What I Love About Being Queer.tumblr.com, where people like uploaded their question, their answer to the question in a photo, and then it joined the Tumblr site. So for me, that was a really exciting project because I got to involve other voices. So it wasn't just me and my narrative, but also to involve other people's experiences and also to share what they love about being queer. So again, doesn't really answer your question because I didn't do it when I was a student, but hopefully it's never too late.
No, that's really awesome. Thank you. It kind of reminds me every time I hear about like photo projects. I'm not sure if you know Samra Habib.
Of course, yeah.
And yeah, her memoir, she included that she did do like a photo project to have the other
more
people
representation, yeah,
same situation, their voices heard and create a space.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, here's a question in the chat. I was wondering if you have any advice on how to be confident in your trans identity. What were the things that helped you? What a great question. First of all, I guess I want to say that it's actually 100%, it's 130% okay not to be confident in your trans identity. I know that that's not the answer you're looking for, maybe, but I think that queer and trans people, there's so much pressure for us to be decisive. One of the things I really struggled with when I was first coming out as trans is how do you pick the right pronoun? And anytime I Googled this, like, how did you know if you choose the right pronoun? Everyone's answer was like, I always knew, I was born in the wrong body, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, in some cases, these stories are true, like are honest, but I do think that because of the way that we have been pathologized and the way that we have only been able to access rights and the medical system, if we convey a sort of defined gender, we've been forced to often assert a gender identity without maybe having the freedom to explore first and experiment and have fun. And so, one of the best pieces of advice I got from a friend when I was trying to figure out what pronouns to use was just try it out. Have a group of friends just try it out with you and see how it feels. And I think that we need to give ourselves more space to not be confident, to explore, to be unsure. Even to this day, I mean, I'm going to share something really personal with you because we're all friends now. But even to this day, when I came out as trans, really all I said, I came out on social media because that's how the kids do it now. And I said that I'm using she, her pronouns. And immediately people started calling me trans woman. And my mom, like my brother was like, you're an auntie now to our dog. And it's like I had chosen something very specific, which was my pronouns. And then like there were all kinds of other labels. And, there's a part of me sometimes that I'm like, oh man, like if I was coming out now, maybe I would have chosen non-binary, maybe I would have chosen gender non-conforming, right? Like language is constantly changing and so much gets projected onto us. So anyways, not the answer you're looking for. I will say what has helped me embrace my transness and love my transness has largely been meeting other trans people, and not necessarily even in person, but like even just following other trans people on social media, because our feeds are constantly showing us, or historically have shown us other forms of humanity. And what I love about social media is that we can curate our feed to actually see a different kind of world. And so when I go on social media and I'm just looking at beautiful BIPOC trans people, I don't feel like a freak. I feel awesome. I feel like the future. So highly, highly recommend if you're struggling and thinking about how to build, just feel more proud of who you are, or appreciate the gift of transness. I think the biggest thing for me that has helped has been meeting other trans people, connecting with other trans people, and following other trans people on socials. Okay, well, thanks. I'm so glad that answer was good for you, or okay for you. I want to please all of you. Okay, let's see. I'm just looking at the other questions here. Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Vanessa. I always knew that I was another gender thing got me for a while because I didn't always know. So it felt like that meant I might be wrong. Yeah, and that's how I felt. Like I think for some people, Amit, I see your hand. Just 1 second. I'm going to wrap up really quickly here what I'm saying. But yeah, I think for some people, some people might genuinely feel like I was born in the wrong body. I always knew. But for me, that's not how I track who I am. Like I don't feel. I mean, it's hard to know who I might have been in a different world. Like if I was growing up now, maybe I would have, chosen or followed down a trans identity sooner. But yeah, I think it's okay not to know. I think it's okay to be confused. And it sounds, I feel worrisome sometimes saying that because again, I think we're so, the argument that's used against us is our confusion, right? So often people, parents will say, well, how do you know? Is it just a phase? And, my pushback on that is like, think about all the people that, straight and cis people get to be in their life. Think of all the phases they go through, divorce, marriage, people make changes in their life and that's a beautiful thing. So actually things being a phase and not being sure is okay. So anyways, Amit, I see your hand. Question.
Thank you so much, Vivek. You've been an inspiration. My name is Amit Ganguly, and I'm from Centennial College, an engineering student. And I see you first time in the Brampton Pride, and I was super excited. I have a picture with you. I definitely
so nice.
share one time. The question would be is that, how do we inspire and motivate South and Eastern queer community who flew back from those countries, like our countries, to Canada and still find like discreet and doesn't get available resources, or maybe they just, doesn't get fit into the mindsets a lot of people. What do you think, what helps initially and what sort of things we need to do more. I mean, there are definitely a lot of things basically in Toronto, but what do you think, especially with South and Eastern community, because it's kind of very difficult to bring them up in the front, you know?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, so I'm going to see if I understand. So were you saying like how, like what kinds of things we can do to help South Asian communities become more aware and accepting? Was that sort of what you were saying? Or
Maybe like more just coming out and telling the stories and, you know, like to be very supportive.
oh, you
If
mean like queer South Asians?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard. I think that, you know, when you layer oppression, so being brown and queer on top of each other, brown and trans, it's like, it's not easy, and families definitely can be a challenge. Again, I think it's really about, you know, I'll never forget the first time I went to Toronto Pride. And again, I know it's not always accessible. I mean, certainly now during the COVID, but the COVID. It's not always accessible to go to a bigger city, but you know, I always really struggled with who I was until one of the things that really helped me, sort of going back to what I was saying just a second ago, is like going to Toronto Pride and seeing a group of other brown gay people. And I remember being like, oh, there's more than just me. And so I think just reminding those individuals that there's more. And sometimes that means just showing them different kinds of like art, you know, like, again, this is where I think social media is so useful, or like movies and art where they have more like brown queer characters. There's a wonderful new show on CBC called Sort of, which I think they're saying is the first non-binary Muslim lead character on a primetime show. You know, maybe showing that to your friend or the people who you're thinking need support, because then they can just see that we exist. I think the biggest thing is just remembering that we exist. I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I didn't see the perspective of going like prides, you know, and going to different movies, and family is definitely a big problem. But thank you so much.
Yeah, and part of it with family for me has been about building patience and changing what my idea of acceptance looked like. You know, like white acceptance looks very different than brown acceptance.
Yes,
You know, like
yes.
my parents, you know, the thing I always say is my parents still don't use my pronouns. It's been like 4 or 5 years. But, you know, when my mom goes to India, she'll buy me bangles and she'll buy me bindis. And, you know, my dad, when I'll send like a photo to him of like me at a gig, he'll be like, you look so beautiful. So, you know, I think for me, what's been important is like, I want my parents to accept me, but I also in some ways need to accept where they're coming from. And sometimes acceptance isn't going to look like a rainbow flag. For me, acceptance with my mom is her, you know, getting me the best deal at Little India when she's like, I'm getting bangles. Or for me, acceptance from my dad is when he calls me beautiful. In some ways, those are more important than, you know, him using the words transgender or calling me she and her. So I think that's part of it too. And with my parents too, it's also taking them a long time. Like I came out to them as gay when I was like 21. But it's been a journey, you know, and I think part of it is also, you know, it's hard because you want your parents to accept you right away, but sometimes they need a little time. And so with my parents, I've been really open to that journey with them, and the more space I've given them, the more that they have come closer to me. And so I think that's the other thing to remind people. Sometimes they might not be immediately accepting, and they might not have all the right words or the right forms of support, but in time, I think that they might get there, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. It answers a lot of questions, and I really want to see you back in Brampton or Centennial anytime. Thank you so much.
Yes, please. I would love that. I would love that. And hopefully in person, please.
Yeah, sure. No worries. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have some other questions?
I have, oh, never mind. Okay, there's another question. But if there's not a question, I can fill in. But you can answer that one first.
Are you sure?
Or never mind. I'm here now. So I'm just
yeah, let's do it. Just do it now. Yeah, take up your space.
Yeah. So you actively share your story and your art very publicly. And I find like that can be very vulnerable. So I just want to know, how do you do that? And what advice might you give to, another creative who wants to share their story through their art, but, they're nervous about, the vulnerability of putting their work and their story out into the world?
I love that question. Thank you so much for asking. So, I mean, in some ways, it's not something I'm never like, I'm going to try to be vulnerable now. I think part of it is that I come from songwriting, and I grew up in the 90s with like people like I'm trying to think, like with, you know, like a lot of female singer-songwriters who were like singing their heart out, you know, like Lauryn Hill and, you know, even Tori Amos, like all these artists, they were so vulnerable in their music. So I think because I come from a music background, my go-to is vulnerability. It's like find a wound and expand on it. I will say that I think what's helped as I have, you know, continued to do more of this is making sure, first of all, that I protect the creative space. I think one of the things that I hear young creatives worried about is like, well, what will my parents say? Or I don't know what my friends will say when they hear this. And it's like, the creative space is sacred. So I think first and foremost, you need to write the story you want to tell, or write the poem you want to write, or write the song you want to write. That's the most important thing. And then you can always edit later. But I always really try to just be as honest and as real, for the lack of a better word, in the art, first and foremost. And then I can go back and decide, maybe I don't want to share this. Maybe I don't need to share this. And you can even like think about it. So that would be one piece of advice, is like protect the creative space and just tell the story first to yourself. Give yourself the space, because most people don't give themselves the space even to tell the truth to themselves. And then the second thing is making sure that you have a bit of a creative community, and they don't even all have to be artists, but people you can vent to. You know, I talked about how when I was writing I'm Afraid of Men, you know, I was having like nightmares every day, and it was useful to be able to like talk to other people, to talk to friends, to WhatsApp them and be like, I'm going through this, and for them to be just very supportive. So I think if you can build a kind of like network of close friends who you can talk to, or even other creatives who you can talk to, sometimes art can feel so lonely in the process. So, you know, pushing against that loneliness, I think, can help with the vulnerability of the creation, if that makes sense. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so we have some other questions in the chat. Thank you. How do you correct people when they use the wrong pronouns? Oh. Oh, I don't know. I mean, it kind of depends. Like, this is where like I really look to allies. Like, if you know, if I'm with a friend, I really hope that they do the work, and I always hope they do the work when I'm not there. To be honest, like, you know, going back to what you said about being confident as a trans person, like I'm not the most like assertive person around that stuff. And part of it is because I'm afraid, and part of it is because I'm shy, and because I'm an introvert, believe it or not. And so, you know, even lately, I've just started to correct people on how they pronounce my name, but it's taken a long time for me to feel comfortable doing that. So, you know, I think for me, it's like I choose the moments that I feel. If I know that this person is quote unquote a safe space, and they're interested in hearing me, and they care about me, or we're building a relationship, I'll say, oh, just so you know, I use she, her pronouns. You know, I just try and drop it that way very casually. If it's like, you know, in a space and it's a man and it's not a space I feel very safe in, I might actually just let it go. So I think part of it is like trying to figure out the moments where you feel like you can assert that, and you know that the person will hear you, and maybe there are spaces where you don't. So like, for instance, my parents, they don't use my pronouns, and I don't correct them, and it drives my brother wild. You know, he's always like, why don't you correct them? Why don't you correct them? But like, I just don't feel the confidence. And again, I really struggle with my parents, because a part of me, and I know a lot of people will disagree with this, but a part of me feels like my parents see me a certain way, and they might not have the right language, but I know that they see me for who I am. And that's almost more important than pronouns. So sometimes part of it's like also trying to let go how important pronouns are. And that's not to say pronouns aren't important, but with my parents, for instance, they're not the most important thing, or at least I've taught myself that they're not the most important thing. So let's see, can you tell us a little bit more about your book? Sure. So I've written a bunch. So today I shared a story from my book called God Loves Hair, which is a collection of short stories. I self-published it, and that's sort of how I got started in the industry. So for those of you that are creatives, I love sharing this story, because I think it's such an important reminder that you don't need an institution to share your art. Like, sometimes you have to find your own path and do it yourself. I'm really into the DIY mentality. I'm Afraid of Men. It looks like that's the one that you wanted me to talk about. So I wrote that. It came out in 2018, and I wrote it sort of during Me Too. And part of why I wrote it is because I felt like so many of the conversations at Me Too really centered these were important conversations, but they did center a particular kind of woman. It was often a cis woman, excuse me, a white woman. And I really wanted to complicate that discussion by offering a trans perspective, especially as someone who has been raised as a male. I felt like I had a quote unquote unique perspective, if you will, on masculinity because I had, to quote Joni Mitchell, I've seen, I've looked at clouds from both sides now. So yeah, and I think for me, I'm Afraid of Men was also important because you know, one of my pet peeves around I'm Afraid of Men is some people will be like, oh, I love your book, I hate men. And I'm like, no, that's not what I wrote. And, you know, for me, the tension of I'm Afraid of Men is actually that I don't hate men. I think the tension of I'm Afraid of Men is that as a queer person, I actually love men and I desire men, but I'm also afraid of men. And both of those things can coexist. You can desire men, but also be afraid. And so I think that that's one of the interesting tensions of the book as well, is like, how do you grapple with both desire and fear? So, it's a short read. I won't say it's an easy read, but it's definitely one of my shortest books. And I have my next nonfiction book. So that was my first nonfiction book. My second nonfiction book is actually coming out in January, and it's called People Change. And some of the conversation we're having here tonight is actually about that, about how for some people, identity is very static. It's like, this is who I am now, this is who I was then. But for me, identity is something that's constantly evolving. I think that there's no such thing as a true self. This whole word of authenticity, I'm kind of like, I'm not into it. I don't believe in authentic self. For me, it's like your authentic self is who you are in that moment, and that we're constantly evolving, and that authenticity is always changing. So if you're interested, you can look that up on the internet. And like I said, it's coming up in January. So it's coming up very soon. It's called People Change. Yes, my brother is very, very supportive. I'm so grateful for the way that he's been very supportive of me. We have had a band together called Too Attached. So if you're interested in some pop music by a POC duo, you can check out Too Attached. Oh, and no, that question wasn't too personal. I'm so happy to answer any questions. So we've got like about 5 more minutes. So I don't know if you have any last questions for me. I'm sure I could take at least 1 or 2. So yeah, let me know, and I'm happy to do my best to answer.
I just have a quick last question.
Sure.
What professor are you an assistant for at the U of C?
I'm an assistant professor of creative writing, English at University of Calgary.
Okay.
Yay, I'm so glad, Nadia. Oh, Philippa, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering, is there any resource, or is there any maybe contact from you, like if people want to reach out and, you know, hear more about you, or something you might suggest that it's, you know, a reliable source where they can find further support? Is there any contact that we can reach you through, or?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, I'm just putting my website and Insta on here. If you like some selfies, there's the Insta. I share a lot of my art and stuff on Insta. But also my website, I really believe in archiving, because especially as people of color, I feel like our work doesn't really get archived or documented. And so my website, like from the beginning of my career in 2002, has been active. I've had a website since 2003, and there's a lot of stuff there. I've written how-to articles, how to get published, you know, how to self-publish, you know, how to talk about racism. There's like a range of articles, videos, music. There's so much stuff on there. So I highly recommend that you check out the website. And yeah, and all of my contact information is there as well. So yeah, check out vivekshraya.com.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Do we have one more question maybe? What's something that brings me joy? Okay, great. What a nice question to ask to close. One of the things I love the most in the world is going to see movies in person. I love movies because they're one of the few places in the world, unless you have a Tommy Texter in the room, they're one of the few places in the world where people can't be on their cell phone. You get to go off into a different world. You can't think about your task list. It's just so escapist. And I just love also the collective experience. you know, I think about seeing snakes on a plane and what it was like to see that with like 100 people or whatever. So I'm so glad that movie theaters are starting to reopen again, because that's one of the things I actually really missed during the pandemic. It's actually so important for my mental health to see movies. So that's something that brings me joy. Favorite movie? Well, I don't have a favorite movie right now, but I'll say two things. One, I just saw a movie called Passing, which is on Netflix with Tessa Thompson. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Hasn't been a lot of good movies this year, but I highly recommend checking that out. And I recently, for those of you that are maybe a little bit older, I grew up with a film called Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt in the 90s. And so I've recently done a photo essay where I reimagine Legends of the Fall with sort of where I take on the character that Brad Pitt plays and have rewritten it as sort of like a trans narrative. So if you're interested in looking that, you also can go to my website. The project's called Legends of the Trans. Look for the photo that looks most Brad Pitty, hopefully, I don't know. Yeah, anyways, thank you so much. This has been so nice. Thank you so much for this opportunity. You know, I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. And like I said, I wish we could be in person, but I really appreciate all your lovely questions. And I really hope that some of these answers were useful to you and that you feel like you got something tonight. And I want to give a big shout out to the organizers, Danny and everyone else that was involved. You know, as someone who organizes, I know that there's like a million people that are involved with bringing out special guests and stuff. So thank you so much for having me. And especially with a multi school event, I can only imagine how much work was involved. So thank you.